Hey there, this is Pam Perry, and we are doing the Pam Perry Picks today. And we're going to stream it on Amazon as well, but technology won't let us be great today, but that's okay because we'll record it and do it later. So I have a guest today, and we're going to be talking about Overlooked. You can get it on Amazon, but right after that, we'll bring up LaVerne Collins, PhD.
Hey yo, kick back, relax, let's dive in the page. Pam Perry Picks got the books for your brain. From fiction to non-fiction, all genres insane. We coming through showing love to the lit game. Greatest stories ever told, gotta find your pick. Imagination running wild, ain't nothing slick. Get lost in the pages, let your mind drift. Pam Perry Picks got your brain in the bookshelf vibe. Turning the pages with pride. Pam Perry Picks got the words by your side. Bookshelf vibe, turning pages with pride. Pam Perry Picks got the words by your side. From the classics to new, we got the books for you. Get your mind right, let the knowledge accrue. Bookshelf vibe, expanding horizons wide. Pam Perry Picks keeping readers satisfied. Books up high, knowledge we can't deny. Get your reading on, just book one fly. Click cover image.
Hey there, so we are streaming on Amazon Live. And the book you can find by going in there and really clicking and look for Overlook. So I'm going to bring up our guest, Dr. Collins, LaVerne. How are you? How are you? Glad to have you.
I am well, and I am glad to be here. Thank you for having me today.
Good. This book is really, really good. Now, how did the book come about? It looks like it's very thoughtful. When I say thoughtful, like a lot of research went into this. So tell us where this came from. Was this part of your PhD?
No, it was not part of my PhD studies at all. This book came about because of my own passion and my recognition that when I was in my master's level program learning to be a counselor, I recognized years later that what I was taught wasn't culturally specific enough. It was monocultural and not multicultural. So I set out to start reading and researching and learning. And the book does exactly what I hoped it would do.
So I'm gonna just give a little bit of, this is really kind of interesting too, because one of the first questions I looked up here, like example, race narrative questions. How would you self-describe racially, ethnically? Has that changed over time? And just reminds us of the recent presidential campaign, how that has been a talking point. But this right here talks about the American treatment systems often miss key aspects of Black mental health. And that's really where we're starting with this. While recent social justice movements have highlighted some issues, many challenges of being Black remain hidden. These include overlooked historical factors, which we'll get into today, identity issues, clinical biases, which I have another client that talks about clinical biases as well, and unrecognized strengths. Dr. Collins addresses these often ignored aspects of Black life in this particular book and explores how being Black affects mental health, really, including the emotional toll of being presumed guilty and the impact of shorter lifespans. And really, one of the things Dr. Collins brings to light is about the hidden grief and the losses caused by racism. And that's really one of the things that it triggered her to write the book. Her book really helps counselors understand the realities better, encouraging them to create more culturally sensitive treatment plans, and also encourages them to move beyond the negative stereotypes of Black families, the Black church, and instead to see these as sources of strength. And that's kind of like what I really want to start where we were talking about at that point of really the cultural part of presumed guilt, the impact on our emotions, the psychological, the mental health. But you noticed it in school. And did you have patients that really were, like maybe your colleagues that were non-Black, where did you notice differences of them overlooking issues? And that's why you decided to write the book.
Well, it's interesting. I can recall back in first grade, second grade, third grade, I was in a predominantly white school. There were at most five, maybe six African Americans out of 30 to 35 students. And I remember that the African American boys were always the ones getting in trouble.
Hmm.
They were always the ones, and I would pay attention. I don't, it's odd how you sometimes notice things even in childhood. I
Mhm.
noticed that white students could do the same thing but not get in trouble to the
Yes.
same extent that black kids did. And I just chalked it up as, gee, those black boys, they really misbehave. I guess they're really bad. And I guess I'm not seeing, but that guy, but no, I guess they are, I guess they do behave badly, worse.
Mhm. Mhm.
What I
But that was
recognized later was that one of them had lost their dad. The dad had died. I now wonder if anybody knew that, took an interest enough in that family to know that that child was grieving. I recognized other families later. I understood the trauma they had been through. And I wondered, hindsight, did anyone from the school recognize that this was not bad behavior? This was a child's response to their pain.
mm. And you saw that as a young person in school,
I
hadn't
saw
even
that in
gone to
school. I
even in
noticed. And
yes.
and I promise you, I bet those young men noticed too,
Yeah.
but they
Yeah.
didn't have the voice to say anything. They would get angry whenever they were reprimanded, but did they have the words to say, "Wait a minute, why do I get in trouble when he doesn't?"
Mhm.
No, they didn't
Mhm.
have that. And if
And
they
so
did resist, they would be further punished because they were seen as being more defiant. They were seen as being rebellious. And one of the things I talk about in the book is that our resilience as Black people comes from our resistance. And
mhm.
resistance in children is often misdiagnosed as a conduct disorder
Mhm. It's delinquent.
or an oppositional defiant disorder, or we pathologize it, unfortunately, and make those kids out to be developmentally troubled or delayed, and maybe they're just resisting racism that they don't know how to call racism.
Mhm. And racism is really, gripping our country right now when we have a black female that's running for president versus a white male. And, they're different, but the way we are treating the, this whole campaign is now about race, and it's really tearing the country apart. The thing that you talk about is that some of the things that are underneath the surface of what historical, even I think you were even talking about even people who are born in different parts of the country, some of the things that will affect their mental health. So give me like maybe the top three things that you saw that are overlooked that counselors in the book, it's not just for counselors, but counselors need to look at just generally in order to better treat their clients.
Yes. The top three things for me would first be historical trauma. Because if you are, like me, a descendant of enslaved persons, you are being raised by, most likely, slavery was not is not that not in the far back history. I don't know how to say it, distant history. It's not in the
It
distant
would be
history
for
of this
me, it
country.
would be my great great grandparents.
Exactly. And for
So it's
me,
yeah.
my great grandmother was born just as the Emancipation Proclamation was probably being delivered, like right around that time. She was born right as slavery was being determined to be unconstitutional. So her parents, that's my great great
Mhm.
grandparents, were
Where
enslaved, picking cotton or working tobacco or whatever. So it's not that far. It's not in the distant past. That's relatively recent past, because although I have a picture of my great grandmother, I knew my grandfather. I knew her son.
Mhm,
I mean,
mhm.
I knew him until he passed away when I was in my late 20s, right?
Wow.
So the influence of that shows up in him, shows up in my mother, shows up in me.
Yes.
It's
And
not that not that
that's three
long ago.
generations.
That's just
I
three
wanna
generations.
I wanna
Exactly.
say that the other thing that might be uh historical trauma is that we don't know any further back than that great great. So I
Yes,
don't know anything. I mean, I'm sure they have DNA ancestry.com and all of that, but we didn't know them. We don't know anybody who knew them. So
exactly. You
when
hit
they
what we call
say
the wall of slavery
yes,
when you're trying to do those DNA searches. You hit that wall of slavery, and it's
and
as
it's
if,
gone. We don't
okay,
exist.
we don't know it. Yes. I was
Yeah.
fortunately able to go back to a person who was born in 1792 on
Wow.
my mother's side. And that did me a world of good, but that's pretty rare.
Yeah.
That's pretty rare
Yeah.
to find someone born in 1792 who then has a son who's on
Record.
record in the census. That's
Right.
pretty rare. Most Black people hit that wall of slavery if they even try. And what becomes frustrating is that you send your glob of spit off in a test tube to ancestry.com and you hope to find something and you still hit the wall of slavery.
Yeah, because there's no records. And that
Right.
is traumatizing. People always say that, that was so long ago, you should forget it, but it is something that we carry forward in our emotional baggage or in our DNA. Uh,
Exactly.
the grant, the lack of not knowing is just a whole nother thing because
Mhm.
we don't know. You can find other generations of uh, other minorities or even other people that come from country and they can go back and say, oh, my great great grandfather did this and, that. And so we have that, we don't have that. It's like, well, we know we came
Exactly.
from Africa, we were kings and queens. And I remember this Dr. Collins, when my daughter saw Roots when she was young, uh she looked at the movie and the whole series, and it was really like life changing for her. I think she was maybe about maybe 8 to 10 years old, and
Mhm.
she looked at me and she said, and does not say that she remembers this, but I remember it very vividly. She looked at me and she said, so we all came from Kuta Kinte.
Oh, bless her
and
heart.
and I was like, no, that was just one family, but we
Mm,
all come from similar things. But she'd
yes.
never seen the entire thing of how that all and I was like, we need to teach this more because it can be traumatizing. So from
And
your
there's
stand.
another, yeah,
Mhm.
there's another point to another piece of this too. We know about genetics. That's where we get our eye color and our hair texture and all the physical features. But many of us don't know about what's something called epigenetics. And epigenetics are like post-it notes on top of your DNA sequence. It doesn't change the DNA. It's just like a note that tells your body, gives your body warnings about how to respond to certain
Ah,
things and in certain environments. So we not we. I'll start with the research that goes with another group first. They studied the stress hormone profiles of the descendants of Holocaust survivors and found that 3 and 4 generations later, they still had altered stress hormones. Stress
mm,
hormone profiles were still changed 3 and 4 generations after the Holocaust.
okay.
Well, we are 5, 6, maybe at the most generations, from slaves being freed and or slavery per se. Would our stress hormone profiles also not be different?
Mm,
Because the epigenetics causes our bodies to be wired to survive the environment in which our ancestors lived. So the
mm.
more trauma that's in your history, the more trauma you are wired to be ready for.
Wow. And it's not just slavery, because even after slavery, there was Jim
Exactly.
Crow and the Jim Crow
Exactly.
and all of the lynchings and all of that. That is more.
Exactly.
I remember my uncle who was just like one generation, and he would tell me about things that happened down south that just traumatized me. He ended up being an
Horrific.
alcoholic
Mhm.
because of the trauma that he faced. We didn't have mental counselors and therapists and things like that he could
Yes.
talk to, but he just witnessed it in his
Yes.
lifetime. down
Yes.
south.
Yes.
And
Yes.
things that were so gruesome and cruel that he would tell me, and as a young child he would tell me, and I was like, that I, you know, I can't now, looking at it now, I could see why he drank so much as a as he got older. It was just like he
Exactly.
could not deal with all of that. And even too, my grandfather, um, being in the army, the way they were treated, a lot of
Mm,
that's not slavery. That's like they were part of
exactly.
like Korea and World War II, and they were
Exactly.
treated bad. And there were things
Exactly.
that horrific things that they probably would never, tell be
Exactly.
told. Mhm.
There are stories. People come into counseling and they want to talk about anxiety or depression. If a counselor doesn't ask for that person's loss history and that person's experience within racist structures throughout their life, they're going to just write that off as anxiety and depression because of current situations and not make any connection with what might be underlying. Maybe you were the first generation to integrate a school. Maybe you were scared to death to go into an all white environment. And you come to me and you say, I have anxiety. I work in a school environment or something like that. And I don't know where this anxiety has come from. And if I don't have the wherewithal to do a race narrative and a loss history, I'll miss it. So I
Wow.
talk about doing race narratives and taking loss histories so that you can really understand who's in front of you. And more than that, we must, as people, be mindful of these stories and their impact in our own lives so that
Mhm.
we can be prepared. Even if our counselor is not, we must be prepared to say, I know I'm carrying a lot of history. I need to probably unload some of this history to understand where I am today. In other words, this book will help anyone who might be a recipient of counseling services to expect more from their counselor than a
Ah,
multicultural approach.
yes,
Let's talk about my history. Let's
yes.
bring, this is the other thing that I was going to say about most important. Let's bring my race and culture to the foreground and not leave it in the background.
Hmm. Yeah,
It's
because they
not
don't want to.
background for me. I
Yeah,
know every day
that's
that
part of it.
that's my identity. It's what we call master status
I like
because
the I like the fact that one of the main things is to overlook what are we missing. And then
mhm,
the part two and three is like the first part is really overlook identity issues. And you
mhm,
talk about that, understand the diaspora more than black, which we are a lot. That's it. Kamala Harris is definitely like more than just black, right? Overlook historical factors, which we kind of talked about how that weighs heavy. And I like how what you said about the Jewish community, how like 2 or 3 generations after Holocaust is still in their
3 and
DNA,
4 generations later. Yes.
3 or 4 generations later. And then overlook clinical bias. That just, a lot of times, this particular book too, it's the person I want to introduce you to. It talks about biases in the healthcare issue. One of it being in healthcare, race, age, sexism,
Mhm.
poverty, weight,
Mhm.
religion, and class. Those are the biases in the healthcare industry. Not talking about what we're talking about
Yes.
here, but just how maybe a doctor would come in and treat a patient based on the
Right.
biases that they have, right? Based on the weight of
Exactly.
the person and those kind of things. You also
Yes.
talk about the overlooked losses. That part right there, when you talk about the impact of a shorter life expectancy for Black Americans, let's talk about that a little bit. We go into part five, which is talk about the overlooked strengths. So let's talk about the overlooked losses, which is the shorter life expectancy for Black Americans. And then let's talk about the strengths as well.
Okay. Yeah, the shorter life expectancies, we know that African Americans do not have a projected lifespan equal to white Americans. But what we often don't think about is how that leaves a family in disarray when someone passes away at a young age. It means that there are losses in terms of perhaps maybe the bride doesn't have her father to walk her down the aisle. Perhaps a
Mhm.
mother is not at a high school graduation. When my daughter got married, she put a rose on 4 chairs in the front because all 4 of her grandparents were already
Wow.
deceased,
Mhm.
and she honored them with that. Finances,
Yeah.
kinship care, all kinds of things are affected in Black families, and a lot of times the shifts that we make to accommodate that, a lot of times those shifts are actually pathologized. Oh, they got too many people in that house, or that grandma doesn't need to be taking care of all those babies, and we're people are judging and pathologizing what has had to happen and has actually become very normative in our culture. So
Mhm.
those losses often come because someone dies young, because we just don't have the life expectancy. And then it leaves a hole that the rest of the family has to fill. Children are grieving, caregivers are grieving while still trying to care for these children. The other thing that when we talk about losses is what's called disenfranchised grief. And the
Yeah.
things that we often lose in terms of opportunities and respect and dignity, and we lose some freedoms just because of the color of our skin, and we lose them subtly. Those are losses that no one has a funeral for. It's
Mm.
disenfranchised because it's not recognized by society, and yet we carry that grief.
Is that something similar to like Driving While Black, that kind of thing?
If you find that, yes, whenever you're stopped,
Mhm.
you have that moment of apprehension and fear and nervousness and
Mhm.
and anger, and if you feel disrespected in that moment there's a loss of respect. How do you grieve that?
Yeah, right. That is
Society
really
makes no
like,
space for that, and those incidents become stacked up, and it becomes cumulative. And then you end
mm,
up carrying a whole lot of grief that society doesn't understand, wouldn't even say you've lost anything. What did you lose? You just got stopped by the police. But what did you lose? They turned down your
mm,
mortgage, but you can always find another house, right?
mhm.
All
Those
of
are the
those things,
those
those
are
are
griefs.
losses.
And each
Yes.
part of grief has a whole series of stages that they have to go through. But if they happen so fast of so many different things, you can't go all through all the stages of all the things. And some of them may
The
stay stuck in
compounding,
anger. Yeah,
right? And
it
it
may stay
it
stuck in
becomes
anger. Yeah.
or it becomes almost a compound or complex PTSD, because each one of those
Ooh,
is traumatizing. So
yes.
you end up having compound layers of trauma.
Mhm.
And if these are all specific to race and culture. And if you don't bring race and culture from the background to the foreground of our mental health discussions, you're just doing a monocultural whitewash type of therapy. And you're not
Mm,
really helping people get at the real root of their pain.
yeah. Yeah. And I can see why the real root of the pain is, there's another counselor, he's out of Minnesota, Lambers Fisher, and he talks a lot about that as well. And he said that one of the things that the white colleagues, that they were actually trying to treat their patients, and they were always coming to him and asking him, like, are these politically correct things to ask, because they didn't know how to really treat or ask without sounding a certain way. And so this book, Overlook, will help them understand culturally, so that they don't feel like they're sounding like stupid or racist or asking the questions, because it's documented, it's historic, and you actually give a science to it in a way, so that they can know and understand, like, these are true cases of why this happens. And
Yeah.
it's not because you're just guessing, but this is something that is
Right.
documented. it
Yes,
this is
yes, yes.
this is
Everything in
documented.
there is research backed, or backed with examples given through case studies, so people
Yes,
can understand it's real.
I
All of it
like
is
that.
real.
The
All of it
part
is
that I
real.
like about the book, about the grief that goes unnoticed, that part I really like. And because grief is something that, people kind of feel like you should get over it. You go through your stages of it and you get over it, but that part I really, really like. So let's talk about the last part where this really talks about the strengths and the
Yes.
cultural assets of Black families, because I want to leave on the high note of
Yes.
this. I will say this: there is a gentleman by the name of George Fraser, Dr. George Fraser. We call him Uncle George, and he does this event every year called Power Network Conference, and I've been going for years, and he's had it probably for 20 years. I haven't been going that long, but I've been going for many years. And he always talks about the ancestral kinship of African Americans, and he really goes through a whole lot about the strength of the kinship with families. And then when I looked at yours, and you talk about that as well, that is culturally something that is very close to our African roots, I guess you would say. So
Yes.
kind of explain that a little bit, because listen, when you see George, George is so he has someone in his family that is dark, 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 and he's as light, light, light. So a lot of times he starts his speeches when he goes to the podium, wherever it is, he says, "Yes, I am Black," because he's usually speaking at Black events, and people are like, "Why this white dude coming up here?" But it's just that's just the rainbow of our culture. That's just
Yes.
him and they all have the same mother and father, but one is light and dark. But anyway, so
Yes.
go on
Yes.
and talk about that part about the strength, because that part I loved in the book when you talked about that. That really was like a champion point, and I remember George talking about that. He built his whole networking on that. That was really what he did.
Yeah, the strengths of Black family life and culture are often overlooked or pathologized. As I said before, the ways that we adapt to take care of people, that can be pathologized. Oh, there's too many people
Mhm.
in that house, and oh, that grandmother needs to let that go and let somebody else raise those kids, and all those things. But family life, multi-generational homes, um, kinship, I should say, adopted kin, that's part of the
Mhm.
culture. We take in whoever needs to be taken in. Black family life is not just by blood, it's by choice
Yes.
as much as it is by bloodline. And without an appreciation for that, you look at a Black family, and we all bought into this story of the crumbling Black family. Do you know that comes from 1965? It's a byproduct of the Moynihan Report, where there was a 1.5% difference between the divorce rates in Black families and white families. And we've been buying into that ever since, believing that Black fathers, even if they are not in the same home with the mother, believing that Black fathers are not involved with their children's lives to the same extent that white fathers are. And there's
Mhm.
research that says that Black fathers, even if they aren't in the home with their children, are more involved than white fathers when they're, yeah.
That reminds
So
me of the old movie. I don't know if people can remember that, but Claudine. Remember that with James Earl Jones and Diane Carroll? And that was like
Claudine, I don't know if I'm familiar with that one.
it helped perpetuate that whole stereotype
Yes,
that
yes.
that Black men weren't they
In
weren't
the
in the home.
in the children's lives. Yeah.
That was during the
So
black
it's a
exploitation movie era. Yeah.
Oh, gotcha, gotcha. So our family structures may look different, but we can't buy into the pathologized messages, and we have to see our family structures, even if they're different, they're strong. Um, Faith and religion and spirituality in Black culture is often mocked on TV, but that's strong. That's a source of our strength. And then
Yes.
our resistance is often judged and pathologized, but that's where our resilience comes. So I say that the strengths of Black family and culture are Black family, Black faith, and Black resistance.
I love that. Yeah. It definitely is a faith. That is definitely for and really you talk about the institution of church. A lot of our movements
Yes,
and start in the church. Martin Luther
yes,
King, the movement, and a lot of the things are from that pillar of our community. Um,
yes.
so I meant to, Laverne, Dr. Laverne, what is the best website that people can actually find out more information for you? Where do we want them to go?
New seasons dot training. And that's
Okay.
where I have my counseling, my training courses and all of my programs, my articles that I've written, everything is at newseasons.training.
Okay.
Just not just new, not news.
Okay.
New,
I'm thinking
new.
because I'm in the news. Okay. No, we're not. New seasons training. That's it. That's it. That is one of the
Yes,
things too. And I like that that has a good ring to it as well, where um, it is a new season where people can actually
yes,
feel that when they come to you, they get the help that they need, that they embark into a new season.
yes,
And I
exactly.
love this book too. It's a Roman in Littlefield.
Yes,
It
Women in
is
Littlefield Publishing.
it's one of the things. It comes in paperback as well as hardcover, so you can get either one. But I think
Yes,
one of the things that people want to if they are in this field, mental health field, whether they are a counselor, a psychiatrist, psychologist, they need
hmm
to have this as a resource, as a tool in their tool chest, because this will really
as
help them with.
pastors, pastors
Yeah.
too,
Oh my
social
goodness.
workers,
Yes.
yeah, anybody that works in any kind of a helping role
Hmm. They
would
need to
benefit
know
from that. And the people that utilize services, we need to be aware of the
what
ways in
questions
which
to ask.
our lives, our history, our culture can be overlooked, so we don't allow it to be overlooked,
Yes. Yeah.
or we don't want to
Um,
be misdiagnosed. I talk about some of
mhm.
the ways that blacks are often misdiagnosed. We need to be
Mhm.
aware of that.
And unpacking your story. That I like that chapter in there as well, where you talked
Yes,
about how to unpack your story, and it will guide you through that as well. Well,
yes,
thank you so much for joining Pam Perry's Picks New Seasons dot training, where they can go and get a lot of the information there as well. So, Dr. Collins, thank you so much for joining Pam Perry Picks today, and
it's my
I
pleasure. Thank you,
all righty. God bless you, and we'll talk to you soon.
and
All
to
right, bye
you.
bye.
Okay, bye
Okay.
bye.
So the book is on Amazon. Make sure that you get it there. We're going to end the stream over there, but make sure that you go and get it.